In 1950, a man walked into a room in Japan and extended his hand to the guard who had beaten him daily for 2 years. What happened next would challenge everything we think we know about hatred, survival, and the human capacity for grace. This is the story of Louis Zamperini, Olympic runner, bombardier, castaway, prisoner of war. A man who endured 47 days adrift in the Pacific, 863 days of torture in Japanese POW camps, and then made a choice that seemed impossible. Why would a man forgive those who nearly destroyed him? The answer reveals something profound about what makes us human. World War II produced millions of stories. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and unimaginable suffering. But some stories transcend the war itself. They become something larger, lessons about the depths of cruelty and the heights of human dignity. Louis Zamperini's story is one of those rare narratives that forces us to reconsider what forgiveness really means. If you're here for stories that go beyond the battles and explore the profound human truths within history's darkest chapters, subscribe now. This is where history meets humanity. Torrance, California, 1920s. Louis Zamperini was not destined for greatness, at least, not obviously. The son of Italian immigrants, he was a troublemaker, a petty thief, a kid running from the law more often than toward anything meaningful. His older brother Pete saw something else. Restless energy that needed direction, not destruction. "If you can take it, you can make it," Pete told him. It would become Louis's mantra. By 1936, 19-year-old Louis Zamperini stood on the track at the Berlin Olympics, the youngest distance runner in American Olympic history. He didn't win. He finished 8th in the 5,000 meters. But his final lap was so explosively fast that Adolf Hitler himself requested to meet the young American. Louis shook the dictator's hand, pocketed a Nazi flag as a souvenir, and returned home with dreams of gold in 1940. Then the world caught fire. May 27, 1943. The Pacific Theater. 26-year-old Second Lieutenant Louis Zamperini climbed aboard a B-24 Liberator called Green Hornet for a search and rescue mission over the Pacific. The plane was a wreck, a spare aircraft known for mechanical failures. 8 men climbed aboard anyway. Orders were orders. 2 hours into the flight, 850 feet above the ocean, the left engine failed. Then the right. The plane didn't glide, it plummeted. The impact tore the aircraft apart. Louis found himself underwater, tangled in wires, trapped in the wreckage as it sank. In those seconds, as water filled his lungs and darkness closed in, he made a desperate bargain with God. "Get me out of this, and I'll seek you for the rest of my life." Something gave way. He kicked free, broke the surface, gasping. Of the 11 men aboard, only 3 survived. Louis, pilot Russell Phillips, and tail gunner Francis McNamara. They hauled themselves onto 2 small life rafts in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 2,000 miles from land. What came next was a nightmare that would make captivity seem merciful by comparison. The first day, they took stock. No food, no water, a few chocolate bars, and flares that would run out quickly. The second day, they drank rain. The third day, they caught a small fish. McNamara panicked and ate all the chocolate while the others slept. Their only emergency rations gone. For 47 days, Louis and Phillips fought for survival on that raft. They caught rainwater in their mouths during storms. They grabbed raw fish and albatross with their bare hands and ate them raw. Sharks circled constantly, sometimes ramming the raft, sometimes breaching close enough to touch. Japanese bombers strafed them with gunfire, shredding the rafts, forcing them to bail water constantly just to stay afloat. McNamara died on day 33. Lewis and Phillips slid his body into the water and watched the sharks take him. By day 47, Lewis had lost half his body weight. His legs were skeletal. Open sores covered his skin. Delirium came and went. Then, on the horizon, land. The Marshall Islands. They had drifted over 2,000 miles. They thought they were saved. They weren't. The Japanese military captured them immediately. For Louis Zamperini, one hell was ending. Another, far worse, was about to begin. Louis was transported through a series of POW camps, Kwajalein, Ofuna, Omori. At each stop, conditions worsened. Starvation rations, forced labor, beatings for the smallest infractions, or for no reason at all. But the worst was yet to come, in the form of a man named Mutsuhiro Watanabe. The prisoners called him the Bird. Watanabe was a corporal, a failed officer candidate who took his rage and humiliation out on the prisoners under his control, particularly Louis. Perhaps it was Louis's Olympic fame. Perhaps it was simply cruelty finding its perfect outlet. Whatever the reason, Watanabe fixated on Louis with sadistic intensity. Every day brought new torment. Watanabe would force Louis to hold a heavy wooden beam above his head for hours. If his arms dropped, Watanabe would beat him with his belt buckle, fists, bamboo rods. He made other prisoners punch Louis in the face, one after another, for entertainment. He forced him to clean the latrines with his bare hands, then denied him water to wash. The physical torture was one thing. The psychological warfare was another. Watanabe would smile warmly, offer Louis a cigarette, speak kindly, then, without warning, explode into violence. The unpredictability was its own torture. Louis never knew which version of the Bird would appear. Winter 1945. Louis was transferred to Naoetsu, a camp in the mountains of northern Japan. Watanabe was transferred there too. The torture intensified. Louis began to fantasize about killing him, not just escape, murder. Detailed, violent revenge. I thought about strangling him every single day, Louis would later say. It was the only thing that kept me going. Does that shock you? It shouldn't. Hatred, in those circumstances, is a rational response. It's survival. It's protection. What's shocking is what came later. If this story is resonating with you, if you value these deeper explorations of what war does to the human soul, hit that like button. It helps others find these stories too. August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was over. For Louis Zamperini, the war had just begun. He came home to California a hero, parades, newspaper headlines, a beautiful wife named Cynthia. On the surface, he had everything. But every night, the nightmares came. Watanabe's face, the beam above his head, the belt buckle, the screaming, the helplessness. Louis started drinking to silence the dreams. He drank until he blacked out, until Cynthia threatened to leave him, until he lost jobs and friends, and the future he'd fought so hard to reclaim. The bottle couldn't drown Watanabe. Nothing could. By 1949, Louis Zamperini was a broken man, consumed by rage and post-traumatic stress that had no name yet, no treatment, no understanding. His marriage was collapsing. His Olympic dreams were long dead. His life had become a prison worse than any camp because this time he was both prisoner and guard. Then Cynthia dragged him to a tent revival in Los Angeles. A young preacher named Billy Graham was speaking. Louis went reluctantly, skeptically, angrily. Graham spoke about pain, about suffering, about a God who understands what it means to be tortured. And then he said something that cracked Louis's armor. You can choose to forgive, or you can spend the rest of your life imprisoned by hatred. But one of those paths leads to freedom, and one leads to death. Louis remembered the promise he'd made in the water, tangled in the wreckage of the Green Hornet. He'd asked God for his life. He'd promised to seek him. He'd forgotten. Or tried to. That night, Louis Zamperini made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He chose to forgive Mutsuhiro Watanabe, not because the bird deserved it, not because the pain had lessened, but because Louis deserved to be free. He poured every bottle of alcohol down the drain. The nightmares stopped, not gradually, immediately. For the first time since 1943, Louis Zamperini slept through the night. Louis returned to Japan, not as a prisoner, but as a free man with a mission. He visited Sugamo Prison in Tokyo, where many of his former guards were held as war criminals awaiting trial. He walked down the cell block, looking at the faces of men who had starved him, beaten him, degraded him. And he spoke to them one by one about forgiveness. Some wept. Some remained defiant. Some couldn't meet his eyes. But Louis extended his hand to each one. "I forgive you," he said. "You're free." He wanted to meet Watanabe most of all. He carried no desire for revenge anymore, only a strange compassion for the tortured man who had tortured him. But Watanabe refused. He'd gone into hiding after the war, evading prosecution, living under assumed names. He would never face justice. He would never face Louis. In 1998, Louis tried again. He wrote Watanabe a letter, inviting him to the Nagano Olympics, where Louis would carry the torch through the Japanese mountains. The letter was an offering of reconciliation, forgiveness in ink. Watanabe refused again. He never responded. He never apologized. He died in 2003, unrepentant to the end. Louis's forgiveness was not dependent on receiving an apology. That's what made it extraordinary. Louis Zamperini lived until 2014, dying at age 97. After his transformation in 1949, he dedicated his life to helping others find the same freedom he'd found. He opened a camp for troubled boys, sharing his story of redemption with thousands of kids who'd lost their way, just as he once had. He spoke at schools, prisons, and churches about the power of forgiveness, not as weakness, but as the ultimate act of strength. He returned to Japan multiple times, not as a conqueror, but as a friend. He spoke about reconciliation between former enemies, proving that even the deepest wounds can heal. Veterans sought him out, men and women struggling with their own demons from war, their own Watanabes, real or metaphorical. Louis listened. He understood. And he offered them the same path that had saved him. Forgiveness, not for the sake of the perpetrator, but for the sake of the victim's own freedom. His story inspired books, documentaries, and eventually a major motion picture. But more than fame, Louis inspired a fundamental question that still echoes today. If he could forgive that, what can't we forgive? Think about it. Really think about it. What would you have done in Louis Zamperini's place? Could you have extended your hand to the man who tortured you? Could you have chosen peace over the rage that felt so justified, so earned? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, and this conversation matters. World War II ended in 1945, but for millions of veterans, the war never truly ended. It lived in their nightmares, their anger, their inability to feel safe again. Some found ways to cope. Many didn't. Louis Zamperini could have been one of the casualties, not killed in combat, but destroyed by what combat did to his soul. Instead, he became something else, proof that human beings are capable of transcending the worst that's done to them, not by forgetting, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by refusing to let cruelty define them. His forgiveness didn't erase what happened. It didn't make the bird a good person. It didn't mean the torture was acceptable or forgivable in any cosmic sense. What it did was release Louis from the prison of his own hatred. It transformed him from a victim into something more powerful, a man who chose his own freedom. This is what makes Louis Zamperini's story timeless. It's not just about World War II. It's about every person who's ever been wronged, betrayed, violated, or broken by another human being. It's about the choice we all face. Do we carry that weight forever, or do we set it down? Louis chose to set it down. And in doing so, he discovered something most people never find. True freedom isn't the absence of suffering. It's the refusal to let suffering have the final word. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it made you think differently about forgiveness and humanity, subscribe to this channel. These are the stories that matter, the ones that reveal what we're truly capable of, for better and worse. Hit that notification bell and join me as we continue exploring the profound human truths hidden in history's shadows. Louis Zamperini ran his whole life, from the law toward glory, from death in the Pacific, from the demons that haunted him. But in the end, he stopped running. He turned around. He faced what terrified him most, and he forgave. That's not a war story. That's a human story, and it's one we all need to hear.